I mean, I could just look that up online, and I feel like I would probably get as much satisfaction out of doing that than actually reading that book. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Read, Share, Repeat, where we discuss books from the perspective of an aspiring fantasy author. Me, Carrie Share. Well, today is a video I have kind of been dreading doing because we are discussing unfinished business. Unfinished business here in meaning my unfinished series audit. I did this last year and I thought I was doing pretty good with only 14 unfinished series in my catalog. Friends, that number has more than doubled in the last year. I can't help it. I am a kind of person who I actually like to take breaks between series entries because I have found that if I binge read a lot in the same series, I tend to get really weary and tired of the same setting. And it actually makes me feel like worse and worse as the series goes on because I'm just sort of bored with it. And so I find that the break in between series entries helps me enjoy the entire series more. And so in my reading lists every year, you'll find that I read a lot of the first entry of new series. And that is what ended up happening this year. I am up to 30 unfinished series. I did manage to get one off of this list. That would be the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, which I finished last year. So at least there's that. Here's hoping that seeing this huge number motivates me to finish more series this year, okay? So in alphabetical order, we have The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi. I actually did not know when I read the first book, The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi in 2023, that it was intended to be a series. I honestly thought it was a standalone. But as I got towards the end of the book, I was like, this feels like it's being set up to be a series, and then I went and looked online and it was being intended as a series, which I'm not mad at. I enjoyed my time with that book and I love, as you all know, Middle Eastern inspired fantasy. So I will definitely pick up the sequel when it comes out, which is, do we know anything yet? Possibly September of this year. We're not sure, but I will be continuing for sure. The next on this list is the Between Earth and Sky trilogy by Rebecca Roanhorse, and I had every intention of finishing this series last year when Mirrored Heavens came out, and then it just didn't happen. And then, unfortunately, or fortunately, I did finally manage to pick up the series in hardcover, and now, because of my annotation project, I need to reread the first two books of that series before I can finish it. I'm gonna do my best, but I would not count on this series being completed anytime soon. The same could be said for Discworld, because that'll probably take me 40 years to finish just because of the sheer volume of books in this series. And I am counting Discworld as a whole and not the individual stories because I think that would just inflate this number beyond what I'm comfortable with. Discworld, as many of you know, is a very expansive universe by Sir Terry Pratchett that encompasses over 40 novels and like 30 additional novellas and companion novels and things. But I think the total is 41 mainline entries, I think. I read the first one, I think in October or maybe in September. My plan is to just slowly work my way through that entire series, but it will be slow going. It's not a priority for me. The next on this list is a duology, The Elements of Cadence, the first of which is A River Enchanted. I read it in 2024. I liked it at first, but my enthusiasm kind of tapered off towards the end. But because it's only a duology, I feel like I can commit to reading the second book, so it's on this list. Then we have the Emily Wilde series. I did like the first one. I thought it was better than fine, but not quite great in my opinion. I think I gave it 3.5, and I'm definitely committed to continuing the series. It was definitely enjoyable. I know that Map of the Otherlands is already out, and if the third one is not already, it will be soon. So again, not something I anticipate finishing this year probably, but it's on my radar. One series I do plan on finishing this year is the Fallen Gods series by Hannah Kaner. The first two being Godkiller and Sunbringer, and the last being Faithbreaker, which is anticipated to be released in April of this year. And I probably will not be dilly-dallying. I'm probably going to get on top of it as soon as it comes out. I really liked the first one. I really loved the second one, and I was so shaken by the ending because it ended on an epilogue, and to me, that completely threw off my perspective, I thought it was like, it can't be over. It can't be over. It can't end like this. Fortunately, it's not over. We've got one more book and I'm so excited for it. Next on this list is the Letters of Enchantment, the first being Divine Rivals, also by Rebecca Ross. I read Divine Rivals at the beginning of last year. Really, really liked it. Didn't really get to talk about it too much because of the boycott, but I thought it was really, really compelling. I thought the ending, I wasn't completely in love with, but I get it as a like hook to the sequel. I have not heard excellent things about the sequel, but I do own it. And again, duologies are super easy to finish. Since I've already committed the time to finishing the first one, I see no reason why I can't finish the second one. But that being said, I don't see myself picking it up unless it comes up as a random draw out of my Mimic. Next up is Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. I read Queen of the Tearling, the first in the series, years ago, and it was just one of those books where I recognized it's not the greatest. It's kind of goofy. There were elements I didn't like about it, but it just sort of came to me at the right time and really entertained me. And I really enjoyed my time with it, even though it wasn't perfect. And I have been meaning to reread the first book because it has been a couple of years now before I get into the rest of the series. I do own it now physically, which means it is also being included as part of my annotation project. This is another series where I'm going back and starting from the beginning, so not anticipating finishing it this year. Next up is the Rook and the Rose series by M.A. Carrick, the first one being The Mask of Mirrors, and this one intimidates the hell out of me because all three books in the series are stupid long. I really liked the first book. I read it as an ebook, but I always knew that I did want to go out and find physical copies because I do like it. In many ways, it is for me exactly. It's a political inspired fantasy with a female main character and a custom-based tarot motif. All of these things are perfectly designed for me, but I only have the second book physically. I need to find the first and third, but also when I buy them, I will have to annotate them as part of my annotation project. So another one that is not a high priority for me, especially since I don't own the first one physically yet. Next up is Saga of the Unfated by Danielle L. Jensen, the first one being A Fate Inked in Blood. And I had a lot of hope for this book when I read it. I really liked the romance. The banter was excellent. And I thought that the story had promise, but as we got towards the end of the book, things just sort of started falling off. The plot relied really heavily on a trope that I hate, which is in that the main character has to be completely stupid in order for any of it to work. I hate that. It really dampened my enthusiasm for the book, but I like the world. I kind of like the plot. I think that as we move into the second book, it'll probably, like, that distaste for the ending will probably not, I wouldn't say be forgotten about, but I think I can just move on from it. So I do intend on continuing with the series. Next up is Secrets of the Nile by Isabella Banez, the first being What the River Knows, which I read late last year. And it might be an unpopular opinion, but I really liked it. And I liked it in ways that I did not expect to like it. The plot was sort of meh for me, and it was actually the characters that I enjoyed a lot more. It's only a duology, so I do plan on finishing the series this year, but I bought them both physically, so the annotation project is going to take precedence. So I'm going to reread What the River Knows before I get into What the Library Hides. But again, it's only duology. I see no reason why I can't finish it this year. Next up is Shadow of the Leviathan by Robert Jackson Bennett, the first being The Tainted Cup. Loved this book last year. In fact, I gave it a 4.5 when I read it, but the more I think about it and the more I recommend it, the more I wonder if I shouldn't have given it a 5. The only reason I didn't was because I always tend to feel a little bit irritated by Sherlock Holmes style characters, and that was true in this book, but everything else about it was great. Really, really, really liked it. I cannot possibly finish this series this year because that was the first book that was released last year. The second will be released, I think, later this year, but it's not going to be completed. So that being said, I do plan on hopping on the next book in the series, which I think is called A Drop of Corruption, pretty much as soon as it comes out. The next series on this list is Six of Crows. So I have mentioned numerous times that I am a pariah on the internet because I did not love Six of Crows. At the time that I read it, I was like, I've seen what I need to see. I don't really need to to experience any more of this world or this story. And then the ending happened. And Inej is my favorite character out of that book. So how can I not continue this with the sequel, especially since it is, again, a duology? So at the time I committed to finishing it, but the more I think about it and the more I look at it on my library, like I have a tag of all of the books I want to read in the future but aren't ready to put on hold or borrow just yet. And every time I see Crooked Kingdom on there, I'm just like, do I need to read it? Do I need to put myself through that? Because for me, the issues I had with Six of Crows outweighed any potential benefit that I would get out of reading the sequel. I didn't like the writing style. I didn't like the characters. I wasn't really in love with the world or the plot either. It all just felt sort of fine. It is just in every way not for me. So it's on this list. But I'm going to be honest with you. I feel no compulsion to read Crooked Kingdom. I feel no desire to go back into it, even knowing that there is an element of mystery about what happened to Inej, what is going to happen to her in the sequel. I mean, I could just look that up online, and I feel like I would probably get as much satisfaction out of doing that than actually reading that book. Oh, and another one that really disappointed me is the Stariel series by A.J. Lancaster. I really liked the first book, The Lord of Stariel. It was another one of those books that just came to me at the right time, exactly when I needed it. It was cozy, it was soft, it was just very relaxing to read. And then I have subsequently liked the second and third books less and less. And then the third book ended on a trope that I really, really hate and completely sucked the enjoyment out of the series for me. But I've read 3 books out of 4, and the trope, while I really hated it, is not a deal breaker on its own, especially not having invested 3 books worth already. So I am going to finish it. I own the entire series on audio, so I do plan on getting to it this year, if for no other reason than to wash it off this list and put it behind me. Next up on this list is a series that I was really unsure if it was complete or not, and that is the Sworn Soldier series by T. Kingfisher. This is the series that follows Alex Easton, starting with What Moves the Dead and continuing with What Feasts at Night. When I looked it up, it seemed to imply that there was another book coming, but I don't know how secure I feel in that information. But I will read it. These are a series of horror fantasy novellas. The first was based on Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher, which was one of my favorites. And I really like Alex Easton as a character, so I see no reason not to continue this series. I just didn't realize that it wasn't complete. Next up is the Bloodsworn Saga by John Gwynne, the first being Shadow of the Gods. And I read Shadow of the Gods on audio in 2023, at least most of it. And then as I was getting towards the climax, I actually realized that I actually owned it on ebook as well. And so I finished reading it on ebook and I really liked it. The ending, so good. And then I bought them in physical copies. So yet again, the annotation project is putting me a little bit behind the 8 ball with continuing on series, but I think it'll be worth it. When I listen to books on audiobook, I'm not absorbing as much information as I would if I were reading it physically with my eyes. And I do want to annotate it, like, actively. It's not something that I'm just like, oh, I have to because I did this project. I'm doing this project. I do actively want to annotate it. My plan is definitely to read The Shadow of the Gods physically and annotate it and see if I can progress a little bit in the series, maybe get the second one this year. I don't anticipate reading all 3 this year. Here's a series that I do plan on finishing this year, and that is the Book of the Ancestor by Mark Lawrence. And I have said numerous times that Red Sister, the first book in the series, changed my life. I love it so much. I read it on ebook. I did end up getting the mass market paperback versions of the entire series, but I do not plan on annotating these versions. I want better copies of these books. Fortunately, they have been a little bit difficult to track down, and I want to finish this series before I go back and start annotating them. So my plan is to finish the Book of the Ancestor with these mass market paperbacks and then try and collect better versions and then annotate those. But after I finished the series. So I do plan on getting to Holy Sister later this year for sure. In the same world and by the same author is the Book of the Ice. I read the first book like really early last year. It was like one of the first books that I read. And this is a YA trilogy in the same world as the Book of the Ancestor. I didn't love it as much, but I still really like the world. I pretty much will read anything set in this world, and I am intrigued to see what comes in the sequels. I just don't own them at all, like even on ebooks. So I need to track those down and actually make it a point to read them, but it's again not a priority for me. Next up is the Books of Babel by Josiah Bancroft, the first being Senlin Ascends, which I borrowed from my library last year and really ended up liking. It was kind of a different style fantasy story, but I was really intrigued by it. This is a quartet, and I ended up finding one of the books of the quartet at Half Price Books and decided to go ahead and add it to my collection. I have since found Senlin Ascends, but after I bought it, I realized it was a former library copy and it's got a big stamp on the top, and I'm not super excited about, so I may be searching to replace that before I annotate it. That's just another kind of question mark, but I do plan on going back and annotating Senlin Ascends. I think this is a book that really will benefit from being annotated as well. Finding the physical copies needs to come first before I think about the annotation. Oh, the next one is The Celestial Kingdom by Sulin Tan, the first being Daughter of the Moon Goddess. And I bought both books before I read either of them, and I didn't end up liking Daughter of the Moon Goddess. So my feeling is that I should just go ahead and read Heart of the Sun Warrior because I own it. It's right there. There's no reason not to. And it is, again, just a duology. But I also, the more I'm thinking about it, I'm like, do I want to go ahead and read this book? Is it really worth my time if I didn't like the first one? So I may end up revisiting that. Like, it's not like I lack for other books to read that I have to make myself read books I know I'm not gonna like just to complete a series. Next on the list is the Daevabad Trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty, and I reread The City of Brass last year. I liked it more than I did the first time, but I still have actual issues with the book, and not the smallest being that my favorite character kind of gets the shaft. And I have kind of looked ahead a little bit into the rest of the series, and that character does not get an ending that I am really excited about. And so I don't know that I will actually continue this series. I think I can probably live without continuing it, but there's also something in me saying, don't give up on it again. You gave up on it the first time. Don't give up on it a second time. And maybe that is just mental illness, but I haven't made a call either way yet. Oh, a series that is definitely not getting finished this year is The Expanse by James S.A. Corey. This is a 9-book series, and I have read the first 2. I did end up buying them physically, but I am very strongly considering not including them in the annotation project because I really don't want to have to go back to Leviathan Wakes and reread it. I thought that book was fine, but the characters were actively bad. The 2 POV characters. I hated them both. I did not enjoy reading from either of their perspectives, but they were the only ones available in that book. But the story and the setting and everything else were good enough to propel me onward. But I really don't know that I want to go back and put myself through it again just to annotate it. That being said, if I read more in the series and get 5 or 6 books deep and then decide that I probably should have annotated it, then I'll regret it even more because then I'll have to go back and start and read 5 or 6 books again. And I am still up in the air. I will definitely be continuing the series eventually. I haven't determined how or when yet. Next up is the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb, the first being Assassin's Apprentice, and I read Assassin's Apprentice in 2018. Really loved it, but it has been so long since I read it. I had determined last year, even the year before that I wanted to reread it. That was even before I bought them physically and planned to annotate. I really liked it. It was one of the only books in my memory that has made me cry. As we all know, Robin Hobb has a multi-series universe that she wrote in, and my hope is to eventually complete that entire universe of novels. But I have to reread the first one first. I was already planning on doing that anyway, but I have several books on my priority rereads list for this year, and that is near the top. Next up is the Founders Trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett, the first being Founderside, my other 5-star book of this year. Oh my God, I love this book so much. And it was actually one of those feelings where I was like, I cannot read the second one because I love the first one so much. I don't know if anyone else gets these feelings, but when you just feel that connection deep in your soul to a book, for me at least, it is hard to move on from it, even with the other books in the series. And I didn't annotate it. I will need to go back and reread Foundry Side and annotate it for my annotation project. I'm not mad about that at all because I did love it so much. Those two factors combined, I'm having a hard time envisioning myself picking up the second one because I loved the first one so much. And I actually experienced this with Red Sister too. It took me I read it in 2018. I didn't read Gray Sister until last year. So 6 years between. I don't think I will put myself through that, but it's not a feeling I am completely unused to. The Legendborn Cycle by Tracy Dion, the first being Legendborn, of course. I liked the first one. I really did. I was actually really enthusiastic about it, which was a surprise because I'm not typically a huge YA fan. And I thought the King Arthur motif was kind of goofy. But I really did like it until the end when the love triangle started getting foreshadowed more and more. And I didn't love that at all. And it really dampened my enthusiasm to move forward. I think I probably will return to it maybe even later this year. But for now, I'm still seething a little bit that I can see where it's going and I don't like it. Next up is the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. I read the first one, All Systems Red, I think in October. Really liked it. Really big fan of Murderbot. Can't wait to see what they get up to next. This is a series of mostly novellas and one full-length novel, but it is, as far as I know, an incomplete series. But there are 6 or 7 books. So probably won't finish, but I do plan on continuing since the next several books in the series are novellas. I can get through them pretty quickly. Next is the Saint of Steel series by T. Kingfisher, the first being Paladin's Grace. I've read the first 2. I didn't love Paladin's Grace. I really liked Paladin's Strength. So it really very much is couples based for me with this series. And we'll just have to see how I fall on the final 2 books of the quartet. T. Kingfisher is one of those authors that I will read anything from, and I am slowly working my way through her entire catalog, which is not an easy feat by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm getting there. Probably I'll read one this year and then one next year as well, and then finish out that quartet. Next up is the Sandsea Trilogy by Chelsea Abdullah, and I loved the Stardust Thief. Loved it. It was the highest rated book that I read in 2023. I didn't quite give it 5 stars. I don't really remember why though, but I still really, really liked it. And I was devastated to learn that we were not getting another book until 2025. The Ashfire King is supposed to come out this spring, I think, and my plan is to reread The Stardust Thief and annotate it. I definitely will be continuing the series this year when Ashfire King comes out. Next up is the Scholomance Trilogy by Naomi Novik, and this is a priority to finish this year. I read A Deadly Education, I think in August or September, and it took me by surprise by how much I liked it. I've mentioned before that I don't really like YA, and I was sort of warned before I picked up this book that I probably wouldn't like it, and it completely took me by surprise with how much I did like it. And I liked The Last Graduate, which I just finished last week, even more. And with both of those books, when I finished A Deadly Education and The Last Graduate, I immediately went up and started reading the next one, which, as I said before, is not typical. I like to have space between entries, but I was so I need to know what happens immediately following this cliffhanger, and immediately picked up both and started. So I anticipate that I will probably read The Golden Enclaves probably before the summer. Oh, and we are done. We have reached the last one, which is the Tide Child series by R.J. Barker, starting with The Bone Ships. And I have mentioned a couple of times that I've been looking for it physically. I talked about it, I think, in my 3x3x3 of that this series is one of my top priority ISOs. After I posted that video, I thought about why haven't I just gone online and just found the copies that I want instead of just waiting for them to appear at half price books, because I have been actively looking for them at half price for years now and never seen them appear. And so I just went ahead and bought them. So I now am the proud owner of all 3 books of this series. The Bone Ships I had already tagged to reread because it has been a couple of years, and I think it is one of those books that will benefit from an annotation. Again, this isn't a series that I'll finish this year, but I'm just happy to have them in my possession and have the chance to continue physically. I'm so excited. And that is it. All 30 series that I have started and do intend to eventually complete. Ugh. I've got quite a bit of reading ahead of me. Like I said, some of these I am prioritizing finishing this year. For sure the Scholomance series, for sure the Book of the Ancestor, Stariel as well. So some of these will fall off. I'm hoping to finish at least 5 series this year. Last year, again, I only finished 1, but if I can finish at least 5 series this year, I'll feel a lot better. But if I add another 15 like I did last year, I'm gonna be in big trouble. So that is it from me today. Thank you so much for watching. I so appreciate it. If you like my content and want to support the channel, please like and subscribe or consider leaving a comment below. Oh, what is next? Oh, I hope I plan on doing that next. In my next video, I will have a behind the bandwagon review of The Bridge Kingdom by Daniel L. Jensen. I hope you look forward to it, and I will see you then. Bye.